Maya wiped the sweat from her brow as she balanced 3 plates along her arm. The diner was packed for the lunch rush, and her feet ached from the morning shift that had started at 5 a.m. At 23, she hadn't imagined her life would involve double shifts at Rosie's diner while taking night classes in business administration. "Order up for table 7. Frank, the cook, shouted from the kitchen window. "Coming." Maya called back, expertly weaving between tables. She glanced at her watch. 3 more hours until she could go home, shower, and catch 2 hours of sleep before her evening class. The tiny studio apartment she shared with her younger sister Lily was barely affordable, even with both of them working. Since their parents' accident 2 years ago, Maya had become Lily's guardian, determined to ensure her sister could finish high school without worries. The bell above the door chimed, and Maya looked up to see an elderly man shuffling in. He wore a worn but clean gray sweater and carried a simple cane. His eyes, clouded with cataracts, scanned the diner hesitantly. Maya noticed most of her co-workers avoided making eye contact with him. This wasn't his first visit, and his reputation preceded him. Demar Wilson, as the staff called him, was known for taking a long time to order, counting coins carefully to pay his bill, and occasionally forgetting items he had ordered. Some servers found him frustrating, especially during rush hours. Maya had served him before and knew he was simply lonely. His wife had passed away the previous year, and he lived alone with no family nearby. "I'll take table 9, Maya told her coworker Jen, who looked relieved. "Be my guest. Just don't come complaining when you're still taking his order." 20 minutes from now, Jen replied with a roll of her eyes. Maya approached the elderly man with a genuine smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Wilson. Your usual booth today?" The old man's face brightened at being recognized. "Yes, thank you, dear. It's a bit busy today, isn't it?" "Just the usual lunch crowd," Maya said, gently guiding him to his regular spot by the window. "How are you doing today?" Mr. Wilson settled into the booth with a small grunt. "Oh, can't complain. The arthritis is acting up a bit with the rain coming, but I needed to get out of the house." Maya placed a menu in front of him, even though she knew he would order the same thing he always did: a turkey sandwich with a side of coleslaw and a cup of decaf coffee. "Take your time, Mr. Wilson. I'll be back to take your order in a few minutes," she said, patting his hand gently. As Maya attended to her other tables, she kept an eye on Mr. Wilson. He was carefully counting bills and coins from a small coin purse, laying them out methodically on the table, a habit she knew well. He always wanted to make sure he had enough for his meal plus a modest tip before ordering. The lunch rush was at its peak when a group of 4 business executives entered the diner. Designer suits, expensive watches, and loud voices announced their presence before they even approached the hostess stand. They were clearly not regular customers at Rosie's, a modest establishment that catered mostly to blue-collar workers and local residents. The tallest man, with slicked back hair and a permanent frown, seemed to be leading the group. "For seats, preferably away from the riffraff," he said to the hostess, not bothering to lower his voice. Maya felt her jaw tighten but kept her professional smile in place as she delivered a chocolate milkshake to a young couple. Unfortunately, the only available table was near Mr. Wilson's booth. The hostess led the businessmen to their table, and they sat down with evident displeasure, making comments about the quaint establishment with thinly veiled condescension. For the next 15 minutes, Maya navigated the diner floor, taking orders, delivering food, and refilling coffee cups. When she returned to Mr. Wilson's table, he had finally decided on his order, the usual, as she had predicted. "I'll have the turkey sandwich, dear, with the coleslaw on the side. And a cup of decaf coffee, if you don't mind," he said, his voice slightly louder than necessary, a result of his declining hearing. "Of course, Mr. Wilson. Would you like mayo on that sandwich?" The elderly man thought for a moment, his fingers drumming against the tabletop. "Yes, a little mayo would be nice. And do you think I could have a pickle with it? I do enjoy a good pickle." "Absolutely. It comes with a pickle spear," Maya replied patiently. As she was taking his order, she could hear snickering from the table of executives. The man with the slick back hair was not even trying to hide his annoyance. Does he have to talk so loud? Some of us are trying to have a business lunch here, he stage whispered to his companions, who chuckled in response. Maya pretended not to hear, focusing instead on Mr. Wilson. After confirming his order, she headed to the kitchen to place it, her blood simmering at the rudeness of the businessman. When she returned to the floor, she noticed Mr. Wilson had started counting his money again, this time more frantically. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to organize the bills and coins. Everything okay, Mr. Wilson? Maya asked, approaching his table. I seem to be a bit short today, he admitted, his voice tinged with embarrassment. I thought I had brought enough, but I must have miscounted at home. I'm so sorry, dear. Perhaps I should just have the coffee. Before Maya could respond, a loud voice cut through the ambient diner noise. For God's sake, can you believe this? They let just anyone in here, the slick-haired executive said loudly to his companions. Some people should just stay home if they can't afford to eat out. We're trying to conduct business here, not watch some old-timer count pennies all day. The diner fell silent. Several patrons looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. Mr. Wilson's face flushed deep red, and he began scooping his coins back into his purse with shaking hands. I should go. I'm sorry for the trouble, he mumbled, attempting to stand. Maya felt heat rush to her face, a righteous anger she couldn't contain. She placed a gentle hand on Mr. Wilson's shoulder, encouraging him to remain seated. Your meal is being prepared, Mr. Wilson. Please don't worry about it, she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Then, taking a deep breath, she turned to face the table of executives. Excuse me, sir, Maya said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I couldn't help but overhear your comments, and I need to ask you to treat all our customers with respect. This is Mr. Wilson, and he's a valued regular here at Rosie's. The executive looked at her with a mixture of surprise and disdain. Do you know who I am? I'm Blake Reynolds, VP of Reynolds Enterprises. I could buy this entire dump with my quarterly bonus. Maya stood her ground. I don't care if you're the King of England, Mr. Reynolds. In this diner, everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Mr. Wilson fought in a war that gives you the freedom to sit here and be rude, so perhaps a little gratitude wouldn't hurt. She hadn't known for sure if Mr. Wilson was a veteran, but the old man nodded slightly, confirming her assumption. Blake Reynolds' face turned an alarming shade of purple. Get me your manager. Now. I'll be happy to, Maya replied calmly, though her insides were churning. But first, I want you to know that Mr. Wilson's meal today is on me. And he'll be getting dessert as well. She turned to the elderly man with a gentle smile. How does a slice of Ruth's apple pie sound, Mr. Wilson? It's fresh today. The old man's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he nodded, clearly moved by her defense. As Maya walked away to get her manager, she heard one of the other executives at the table mutter, that was completely unnecessary, Blake. The old man wasn't bothering anyone. She returned with her manager, Ted, a fair-minded man who had owned Rosie's for over 20 years. After listening to both sides, Ted informed Mr. Reynolds that while he valued all customers, he wouldn't tolerate anyone being disrespected in his establishment. If you gentlemen can't enjoy your meal without making other customers uncomfortable, I'll have to ask you to leave, Ted said firmly. Astonishingly, Blake Reynolds and his group paid their bill and left, but not before Reynolds shot a venomous look at Maya and announced loudly that he would make sure she regretted her little stunt. After they left, the diner burst into applause. Mr. Wilson reached for Maya's hand and squeezed it gently. Thank you, my dear. No one stood up for me like that in a very long time. Maya smiled, though her stomach was in knots. She had just antagonized someone who clearly had power and influence, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. It was nothing, Mr. Wilson. Now, let's get you that turkey sandwich and pie. The following week passed in a blur for Maya. Between her shifts at the diner, classes, and helping Lily with college applications, she barely had time to worry about the incident with Blake Reynolds. Still, each time the bell above the door chimed, she found herself tensing, half expecting the executive to return with some form of retribution demar. Wilson had returned to the diner twice since the incident, each time leaving Maya a tip that she suspected was more than he could afford. She had tried to refuse, but the pride in his eyes made it impossible without hurting his feelings. On Friday afternoon, as Maya was wiping down tables during a rare quiet moment, the door chimed, and a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 60s entered. Unlike Reynolds and his group, this man's expensive suit seemed to sit comfortably on his shoulders, as if he wore it because he chose to, not because he needed to impress. He approached the hostess stand, spoke briefly with the hostess, and then made his way directly to Maya's section. Her first thought was that he must be connected to Reynolds somehow, perhaps a lawyer with a cease and desist order or a complaint. "Excuse me, are you Maya Chen?" the man asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Maya straightened her spine, tucking her cleaning cloth into her apron pocket. "Yes, I am. How can I help you, sir?" The man extended his hand. "My name is Richard Reynolds. I believe you met my son Blake last week." Maya's heart sank. Of course he was here to demand an apology or worse. She shook his hand tentatively. "Mr. Reynolds, about what happened?" He held up a hand, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Please, may I sit? I'd like to have a conversation with you, if you can spare a few minutes." Ted, who had been watching from behind the counter, gave Maya a nod, indicating she could take a break. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, Maya led Richard Reynolds to an empty booth. "I should tell you right away, Ms. Chen, that I'm not here to cause trouble for you," Richard began once they were seated. "Quite the opposite, in fact." Maya's confusion must have shown on her face, because the older man smiled kindly. "The elderly gentleman you defended last week, Mr. Wilson. He's my father, Harold Wilson Reynolds." Maya felt her jaw drop slightly. But your last name's." "My father dropped the Reynolds years ago after a falling out with my grandfather. He's a proud man, and he insisted on making his own way. By the time they reconciled, he'd established himself as Harold Wilson, and he kept it that way professionally." Richard sighed, folding his hands on the table. "My son Blake never knew his grandfather growing up because of this old family rift. I've been trying to heal that relationship for years, but my father is stubborn, and Blake. Well, Blake has unfortunately inherited some of the less admirable family traits." He paused, his eyes growing distant for a moment. "After my mother passed last year, my father refused to move in with us or even to accept financial help. He insists on living independently on his pension. I check on him when he allows it, but he values his routine and his privacy." Maya listened, trying to process this unexpected connection. "What Blake didn't know," Richard continued, "was that I've been secretly meeting my father for lunch once a week at various places around town. Last week, I had an emergency board meeting and had to cancel our usual lunch. Apparently, my father decided to come to this diner anyway. It was pure coincidence that Blake was here with clients on the same day." "I'm sorry about what happened," Maya said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for. Richard shook his head firmly. "Don't be. My father called me that evening, something he rarely does, to tell me about a remarkable young woman who stood up for him. He was genuinely moved by your kindness." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table to Maya. The embossed card simply read, "Richard Reynolds, CEO, Reynolds Enterprises," with a phone number. "Blake is my son, and I love him, but he has a lot to learn about leadership and human decency. What you did standing up for someone vulnerable even at personal risk, that's the kind of integrity we actually value at Reynolds Enterprises, despite what my son might have led you to believe." Maya stared at the card, unsure what to say. "I understand you're studying business administration while working double shifts here," Richard continued. Maya's eyes widened. "How did you?" "My father is quite observant, and you two have apparently had several conversations. Richard smiled. He also mentioned you're raising your younger sister after losing your parents. Maya nodded, suddenly feeling vulnerable herself. Reynolds Enterprises has a scholarship program for promising students, particularly those who demonstrate exceptional character and work ethic. We also have a comprehensive internship program that includes mentorship and practical experience across various departments. He reached into his pocket again and produced a folded document. This is an invitation to apply for both programs. Given what I've heard about you, I'm confident you would be an excellent candidate. Maya took the document with trembling hands. Mr. Reynolds, this is very generous, but I don't want special treatment because of what happened. This isn't charity, Maya. It's recognition of merit. The fact that you stood up to someone you perceived as powerful to defend someone vulnerable tells me more about your character than any resume could. Those are qualities we need more of in the business world. Richard stood, straightening his jacket. Think about it. The application details are all there. And regardless of what you decide, I want to thank you personally for what you did for my father. It meant a great deal to him, and to me. As he turned to leave, he paused. Oh, and don't worry about Blake. He's been temporarily reassigned to our office in Seattle, where he'll be working directly with our community outreach team. I think a few months of community service will do him good, don't you? With that, Richard Reynolds left, leaving Maya staring at the documents in her hand, her mind racing with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. 3 months later, Maya stood in front of the imposing glass building that housed Reynolds Enterprises headquarters. Her reflection in the glass showed a young woman in a modest but professional navy blue suit purchased secondhand but tailored to fit perfectly. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and though nervousness flickered in her eyes, her posture conveyed determination. After much consideration and long conversations with Lily, Maya had applied for both the scholarship and internship programs Richard Reynolds had mentioned. To her amazement, she had been accepted to both. The scholarship would cover the remainder of her business degree, and the part-time paid internship would provide almost as much income as her 2 jobs at the diner combined, with far more flexible hours. Ted had been sad to see her go but genuinely happy for her opportunity. You deserve this, kid, he had said, giving her a rare hug on her last day. But know you've always got a place here if you need it. The internship orientation was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. Maya had arrived early, partly out of punctuality and partly because she wanted a moment to calm her racing heart before stepping into this new chapter of her life. It's quite something, isn't it? A familiar voice said beside her. Maya turned to find Mr. Wilson, or rather, Harold Wilson Reynolds, standing next to her, leaning on his cane but looking more vibrant than she had ever seen him at the diner. Mr. Wilson. What are you doing here? She exclaimed, genuinely delighted to see him. The elderly man chuckled. I still keep an office here, believe it or not. Emeritus status. I come in once a week to torment the young executives with stories about how we did things in my day. His eyes twinkled with mischief. And please, call me Harold. I think we're well past formalities, don't you? Maya smiled warmly. I still can't believe all of this, she admitted, gesturing to the building. Sometimes the universe has a way of putting the right people in the right place at the right time, Harold said thoughtfully. Richard told me you're starting the internship program today. I thought I might walk you in, if you'd permit an old man the pleasure. I'd be honored, Maya replied sincerely. As they walked through the lobby together, Harold spoke quietly. You know, after my Elizabeth passed, I wasn't sure I had much left to live for. Our routines together, our little rituals, they were what gave my days meaning. Going to that diner alone was one of the hardest things I've done. He paused as they waited for the elevator. But then you showed me kindness. Not pity, not condescension, but genuine kindness. And then you stood up for me when it would have been easier to say nothing. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. What I'm trying to say, my dear, is that sometimes when we think we're at our lowest, life has a way of surprising us. I suspect you're going to surprise a lot of people here, yourself included. Maya felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Thank you for saying that. I'm going to do my best. That's all anyone can ask, Harold replied as the elevator ascended smoothly. And between you and me, I've already heard whispers that Richard is particularly interested in your progress. He doesn't usually take such a personal interest in the internship program. The elevator doors opened onto a bustling floor of cubicles and glass-walled offices. A young woman in a crisp black suit approached them immediately. Mr. Wilson Reynolds, good morning. We weren't expecting you today, she said, clearly surprised but pleased to see the elderly man. Just escorting our newest talent to orientation, Jennifer, Harold replied. This is Maya Chen. Take good care of her, she's going places. Jennifer smiled warmly at Maya. Welcome to Reynolds Enterprises, Ms. Chen. The orientation group is gathering in conference room B. I'd be happy to show you there. Harold gave Maya's hand a gentle squeeze. Go on, then. And remember what I said. You belong here just as much as anyone else. As Maya followed Jennifer through the office, she caught a glimpse of Richard Reynolds in his corner office. He looked up from his desk and, seeing her, offered a small nod and a genuine smile. Maya returned the gesture, feeling a surge of gratitude and determination. The conference room was filled with about 15 other interns, all looking some combination of nervous and excited. Maya took a seat, pulling out a notebook and pen. Welcome to Reynolds Enterprises internship program, a poised woman at the front of the room began. My name is Sofia Torres, and I'm the Director of Talent Development. Over the next 6 months, you'll be rotating through various departments, gaining hands-on experience while being mentored by some of the top minds in the industry. As Sofia continued outlining the program, Maya felt a sense of purpose settling over her. This opportunity hadn't come easily. It had arrived through an unexpected act of kindness, a moment of moral courage when she had simply done what she believed was right. Her phone vibrated softly in her pocket. Discreetly checking it, she saw a text from Lily, "Crush it today, sis. So proud of you." Red heart, Maya smiled, tucking the phone away. For the first time in years, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. The future, once a source of constant anxiety, now held promise. She would still face challenges balancing school, this internship, and her responsibilities to Lily wouldn't be easy, but for once, the path ahead seemed clear. 1 year later, Maya stood in the lobby of Reynolds Enterprises, a small gift bag in her hand. She no longer felt intimidated by the imposing building, instead, it had become a place of growth and opportunity. Her internship had turned into a part-time position in the strategic planning department while she completed her degree, and Richard Reynolds himself had become something of a mentor to her. Today, however, she wasn't here for work. It was Harold Wilson Reynolds' 80th birthday, and a small celebration had been organized in the company's rooftop garden. Maya. Right on time, Richard greeted her as she exited the elevator onto the roof. The space had been transformed with tasteful decorations and a small buffet of Harold's favorite foods. I wouldn't miss it, Maya replied, smiling. How's our guest of honor? Complaining about the fuss, but secretly enjoying every minute of it, Richard chuckled. He's over there, holding court with the board members. Sure enough, Harold was seated at a table surrounded by attentive executives, gesturing animatedly as he told one of his famous stories from the company's early days. The past year had been transformative for many relationships. Harold and Blake had begun the slow process of reconciliation, especially after Blake's humbling experience in Seattle. The younger Reynolds had returned from his reassignment with a markedly different attitude and had even apologized to Maya during a company event awkwardly, but sincerely. Maya had flourished in her role, her practical experience from managing household finances and working multiple jobs translating surprisingly well to corporate strategy. Her perspective as someone who had struggled financially brought valuable insights to a company that primarily served wealthy clients but was looking to expand its market. As Harold concluded his story to appreciative laughter, he spotted Maya and waved her over enthusiastically. And here's the young woman I was just telling you about, he announced as she approached. Maya Chen, the future of Reynolds Enterprises, if my son has any sense at all. Maya felt herself blush. Happy birthday, Harold, she said, handing him the gift bag. Nothing extravagant, just something I thought you might enjoy. Harold opened the gift, pulling out a framed photograph. It showed him and Maya at Rosie's diner, taken during a lunch they had shared there a few months after Maya started her internship. Both were laughing, comfortable in each other's company despite the 6-decade age difference between them. Ted helped me with it, Maya explained. He found the security camera footage from that day and grabbed a still. Harold's eyes misted over as he looked at the photo. This is perfect, he said softly. The beginning of our strange little family. And in many ways, that's what they had become. Harold had taken on a grandfatherly role in Maya and Lily's lives. He attended Lily's high school graduation, beaming with pride when she announced she'd been accepted to college on a full scholarship. Sunday dinners at Richard's home often included the Chen sisters, creating a warm extended family none of them had expected. As the party continued around them, Harold set the frame carefully on the table and took Maya's hand. You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about how things might have turned out differently, he said, his voice thoughtful. If you hadn't been working that day, or if you had chosen to ignore an old man being humiliated, I could never have done that, Maya said simply. Harold nodded. That's precisely the point, my dear. Character is what you do when no one important is watching, or at least when you think no one important is watching. He smiled wryly. You had no idea who I was, who my son was. You just saw someone who needed an ally. Richard joined them, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. Are you monopolizing our rising star again, Dad? Absolutely, Harold replied without a hint of remorse. I discovered her first, after all. Richard laughed, then turned to Maya with a more serious expression. I've been meaning to talk to you about the executive training program. With your degree nearly complete, I think you'd be an excellent candidate. Maya's eyes widened. The executive training program was the fast track to leadership positions within the company, usually reserved for graduates from elite business schools. I am honored, but no buts, Richard interrupted gently. You've proven yourself repeatedly over the past year. Your performance reviews are exceptional, and your strategic insights during the Henderson project saved us from a potentially costly misstep. Harold beamed proudly. What did I tell you? Going places. As the conversation shifted to the details of the program, Maya felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined, all stemming from a moment when she had simply chosen kindness over indifference. Later, as the party wound down and the sunset painted the city skyline in hues of orange and gold, Maya found herself alone with Harold at the edge of the rooftop garden. Penny for your thoughts, the elderly man said, coming to stand beside her. Maya smiled. I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out. A year ago, I was worried about making rent and keeping Lily in school. Now your family, Harold finished for her. And not because of charity or luck, but because you earned it through your actions and your character. He looked out at the city thoughtfully. You know, I spent most of my life believing that success was measured by financial statements and market share. It took me nearly 8 decades to realize that the true measure of success is the impact we have on others. Maya nodded, understanding deeply what he meant. When I walked into Rosie's that day, I was a lonely old man, estranged from parts of my family, refusing help out of stubborn pride, Harold continued. Your simple act of kindness didn't just defend my dignity, it began a healing process I didn't even know I needed. You've given me far more than I gave you, Maya replied softly. Harold shook his head. That's not how kindness works, my dear. It multiplies. One act leads to another, and another, until suddenly you find yourself surrounded by the very thing you once gave away. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they stood in comfortable silence, an unlikely pair brought together by chance, kindness, and the courage to stand up for what's right, a testament to how a simple act of compassion can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully comprehend. Soft background music rises, and that brings us to the end of today's story. Maya's courage to stand up for an elderly stranger completely changed the trajectory of her life, but more importantly, it shows us how small acts of kindness can create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see.